Hi, I'm Paul Comfort, and this is Transit Unplugged. You know, I remember way back when I first started my career in Queen Anne's County as the county's first transportation coordinator in my early 20s, right out of college. I was so excited to buy my first bus for the agency. And I remember it was an Eldorado, 7.3-liter diesel. I love that bus. I used to drive it. I actually got my CDL, my commercial driver's license, driving that bus, because that's always been part of kind of my history, one of these historic relics of my career over 30 years ago, getting that bus. I remember the Secretary of Transportation coming over and delivering the keys to me. I put a picture of it recently up on LinkedIn about that. But now, over 30 years later, unfortunately, we've had some issues in the bus manufacturing business. The REV Group, which was the owner of Eldorado, in January of this year announced that it would close its ENC facility by the end of this year and exit the transit bus manufacturing business. And that was in the wake of Proterra, our leading electric bus manufacturer, filing for bankruptcy the previous year, citing the costs and logistics of making small orders from many transit districts as a factor in its bankruptcy. And just prior to that, in June of last year, Nova Bus announced that it would leave the U.S. market by 2025 and focus on its Canadian facilities. Do you realize that at least 10 bus manufacturers have left the U.S. market since 2003? And now we have these 4 remaining, but Proterra having been purchased by Phoenix Motor Cars, trying to bring that back. Volvo Group bought its battery businesses, and Nova on the way out. 2 primary large manufacturers left with GILLIG and New Flyer. And I wanted to find out what was going on. I mean, you know what's happening. You've seen what's happening in the industry. People I've talked to over and over on this podcast tell me that the Buy America requirements, where we can't buy buses from overseas, although some agencies have now requested a Buy America waiver of FTA. They have yet to hear from that. But there's been issues continually plaguing this industry, and so much so that the White House held a forum in February of this year to kind of pull everybody together. I think 25 CEOs of transit agencies went there. I talked to a number of them afterwards who filled me in on what happened. And then APTA came out with some recommendations. They had a bus manufacturing task force, very serious business. I wanted to find out more about where we're at right now in the summer of 2024. And who better to talk to than the former FTA Administrator, Sherry Little, who now helps lead up Cardinal Infrastructure. She brought with her representatives of America's largest bus manufacturer, New Flyer, Jennifer McNeill, Vice President of Public Sector Sales and Marketing, and Stephanie Laubenstein, Director of Sales and Business Development, to tell us what is going on in the industry, what are they doing to solve it, what can the public sector do to make partners with these bus manufacturers to make sure that they stay stable and relevant and alive to provide buses for us, and what's the future look like? This is going to be a great podcast for those of you in the public transportation industry. I encourage you to stay tuned for this great interview. Let's listen. Great to have with us a great guest today to talk about the health of the OEM industry. The bus industry, you know, one of the biggest parts of the bus industry is actually the bus. And so we need to have good, healthy bus manufacturers, and excited to have with us 3 of the best people that we could talk to about it. And that is my good friend, Sherry Little, former FTA Administrator, and Jennifer McNeill and Stephanie Laubenstein from New Flyer, North America's largest bus manufacturer. Thank you all for being with us today.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Sherry and I have been talking actually together because we work together somewhat on the side with another group that we're involved in about the health of the bus manufacturing industry. And as a former FTA Administrator, and now Sherry, in your role as managing partner of Cardinal Infrastructure in Washington, D.C., you are on top of this. Maybe give us a little bit of what's happening right now as we talk August, September of 2024, and give us a little historical precedent.
Happy to do that. And thank you for having us on, Paul. We're glad to see you and spend some time with you. The reason why this issue has been so pivotal in our industry is that with the passage of the IIJA, there's unprecedented historic funding for buses, bus manufacturing, and there's a real goal in the Biden administration to focus on climate change issues. Electric buses and buses generally, getting people out of single occupancy vehicles is a really critical cornerstone of the Biden infrastructure agenda. But it is worth talking about that a critical feature of actually meeting that goal is actually the delivery of the vehicles. So New Flyer was really the canary in the coal mine in raising some health issues before the Biden administration and to our industry generally. And Stephanie and Jennifer are going to talk about what that looked like. But the meaningful part of this is that we were able to, because of advocacy issues with the White House, with FTA, and with APTA, were able to focus on what the critical impediments were to delivering clean green buses and what the administration could do to help deliver those buses in a meaningful way where there was enough healthy competition in the industry that we could help the president deliver on that promise. So as a result of the creation of an APTA task force, as well as engagement with the White House Infrastructure Office, and especially with FTA, we had some meaningful reforms that were put in place that culminated in what we call in the industry a Dear Colleague letter and a report that focused on the health of the industry and looked at some specific issues which had the potential for upending the delivery of this really important promise for the Biden administration. It took 18 months or more. There was a lot of back and forth between the industry players and the OEMs themselves, but I think we've had some successes on this front. Maybe Stephanie can speak to this. It's that New Flyer and sounding an early alarm looked at advocacy to figure out what the specific provisions were in federal law that would help ease the pain for OEMs overall. And I think that's worth talking about because in my advocacy career, this was pretty unusual to get the attention of the White House where they were focused on it in a meaningful way when they passed this historic piece of legislation that has billions of dollars associated with it. And then they responded in real time to trying to address these issues, which is what's so meaningful in our industry. Maybe Steph or Jen can talk about what that looked like and how the culmination of that effort resulted in something that has been really meaningful in the notice of funding availability that came out and how the manufacturers were beneficiaries of payment terms issues, customization term issues.
Okay. Stephanie, anything on that?
The process was really interesting. We definitely started with conversations around what is included in legislation and where are we seeing hurdles when we need cash moved up front. What are the issues that the agencies are running into and how can we help with that? And what we determined was that there wasn't a lot of clarity around what could or could not be done. And so one of the first places we started was with the FTA and having conversations around what could occur and helping to get some guidance from there. We also went into the White House on a couple of occasions, actually, and had discussions around our supply chain, the state of our business, and what was happening in order to bring a little bit of attention to those items because we could really feel the pressure occurring in our business. We also, of course, went to the Hill and did visits with different members to talk about the issues. And one of the things that really came out that we're still working our way through right now was that any type of advance payment required security equal to the amount of the advance payment. And so what we did is we wrote some legislation in a bill around to help actually offset that and take that away. And instead of making it mandatory that there may be a bond or there may not be a bond, we just tried to take away the musts, right? And so that was one of our goals. And so we're currently working through a bill right now with Senate Banking and through the House T&I groups that basically says you may have a bond, but it's not required. That basically an agency, when they procure, they take a look at the responsibility and responsiveness as a bidder, and they can make some decisions around it. And so that you can do an advance payment without that security option if you deem it necessary or okay by your standards. And that you don't need an FTA concurrence in order to do that. So removing some of the administrative pieces, which should help with some of the hurdles that the agencies are having and allow them to actually realize larger discounts because bonds cost money, financing costs money. And so if we can take away some of these pieces, we can actually lower the price of buses, right, when we're selling them. And so we have that working kind of through one stream. And then, of course, through the other stream, we did all the knowledge and education around and information gathering with the FTA around price adjustments, payment terms, contract terms. We worked on that APTA task force that they put together. We visited the White House and we tried to make sure that there was really clear definition around those items. And once we had that clear definition, we were actually really pleased and surprised because when the loan grants came out, the Notice of Funding Award for the low and no emission, it had priorities noted in it around advance payments, progress payments, customization, procurement methods to reduce price or reduce excessive customization. And so you could really hear and see that the industry wanted to grasp these items that are really meaningful to our business. And so that's a lot of the work we did. Jen, did you want to have anything that you added to that, please?
I think you covered most of it. I think that the FTA has been extremely helpful, not only in clarifying what's permissible, which is what the Dear Colleague letter, but really encouraging it through the Low-No and Bus and Bus Facilities program, the competitive grant awards. We're really hopeful that it is the catalyst that will actually change many of the base contracting terms and conditions that come out in procurements going forward. So we're hoping to see this lovely transition to sort of healthier contracts in general for the industry.
Thank you for that setup. I know that the meeting that was held in the White House in February was attended by at least 25, I think, CEOs, industry CEOs, and a number of them have shared with me their thoughts on that and how important they felt like that meeting was. Jennifer, tell us about New Flyer and the industry and kind of the general perspective of where you are now and where the industry is now.
So maybe before I do that, I'll preface this. The past 4 years has been extremely difficult for everyone, but the North American transit bus manufacturers have had just an extraordinary set of circumstances leading up to today. And, to preface my comments, we kind of need to remember that bus manufacturing in North America is an engineer-to-order business, meaning you can spend 12 to 18 months in public procurement, you can bid the contract, 6 months of engineering the vehicle, then you freeze a bill of material, you go out and you buy all these parts, and then you build. So that whole process can take 3 years. And if we think about where we were 3 years ago, there's been just a lot of turmoil in our industry over that period of time. So, the challenges that bus manufacturers have seen could actually have started with a procurement that began in 2021, or right in the middle of the pandemic. So over the past 4 years, there's 3 things that have occurred in the time frame that had really serious consequences for bus manufacturers. The first thing was reduced manufacturing run rates. And at the beginning of the pandemic, there were a lot of facility shutdowns, that sort of thing. And then when business started moving again, we actually found that many transit agencies had frozen their procurements, basically kind of preserving their capital budgets. And that resulted in a little bit of a starvation, let's just say, of the pipeline that was keeping bus manufacturing lines running. And then once the IIJA funds started to flow, that actually picked up again. And the problem shifted from not being related to enough bus contracts. It actually shifted over to supply chain. So, the bus manufacturers and all of the automotive supply chain had used up the inventory sitting in the supply chain, and we started to see supply shortages. And as a result, all the manufacturing run rates kind of dropped. The second thing that we saw in 2021 and 2022 was unprecedented rapid cost inflation that fell kind of right inside that contracting time frame. So things that you had priced for, a regular level of cost inflation, where all of a sudden these contracts were immediately underwater and manufacturers were basically taking losses on every single contract in their backlog. And then the third thing we saw was the actual supply disruption. So we were getting at the height of it in 2022, no more than 2 weeks of notice between a decommit from a major supplier and it actually hitting the line. And because these are customized engineered to order vehicles, basically we had a number of different shutdowns and dropped line entries, which was pretty traumatic. So, all of those things combined, it was kind of this perfect storm of sort of terrible risks that all came true at the same time, really crippled the bus manufacturing industry. At the worst of the reduced run rates, we saw almost every manufacturer hitting something like 55 or 60% of their capacity. And things are starting to recover. So, that was kind of the 2022, mid-2022 timeframe. Things are coming back. We are seeing a very healthy level of active procurements. In fact, quite frankly, the market is as high as we've ever seen it, particularly with zero emission contracts. We have a strong order book and backlog. The supply chain is improving. I think we're seeing less pandemic-related disruptions and more disruptions that are kind of one-off instances related to workforce and labor, as opposed to kind of true shortages. So we're on our way back. We were really pleased with our second quarter
results. It was kind of the first time since, at the beginning of the pandemic that we actually saw positive earnings. So, we're starting to recover. But it has been a really, really long, rough haul for all of the transit bus manufacturers.
People that aren't involved kind of in the give and take of the OEM industry, they are maybe aware that, the Congress and the Biden administration released billions of dollars for buses. Why have we gone from 5 manufacturers down to 2 or 2.5, whatever? And so I think you've helped kind of explain that a little bit more, that there were a lot of other competing pressures. Stephanie, what do you have to add to that and maybe some specifics about what's happening now?
We've really seen the industry come together, all the different stakeholders, from the government, the transit agencies, to the transit vehicle manufacturers, the industry associations, come together, the suppliers, and really think about what can we do different and what needs to change in order to keep every stakeholder healthy. And in order to be able to actually spend the funding that's available and see through with those commitments. And so if you take a look at the task force recommendations, the FTA Dear Colleague letter, and the conversations that occurred at the White House, what you would see is a couple trends occurring. You would see conversations around payment terms. And so, if we start there, the reason for that is, as Jen noted, these are engineered to order buses. They're custom, they're specific. The current payment terms in the industry are that buses are paid for 100% at the time they are delivered, accepted, and put into revenue service by a transit agency. So you could start your building process. So you could get your purchase order, start your engineering, start ordering your parts, raising that bill of material. You could order every piece, pay for it, pay your suppliers, and then deliver the bus. And that could take 50 weeks, 60 weeks, depending on the size of the order, sometimes even longer. And then you would get paid at the very end of that. If you can imagine, with today's interest rates, the cost of financing that is extremely high for businesses. And the price of a bus has increased due to inflation, but also because of the zero emission transition. We're now looking at a significant piece of our production line being zero emission, which means it's either going to be a trolley, a fuel cell, or a battery electric bus. And the price of the components that go in there are quite a bit higher. And so with the engineer to order and the pricing, it becomes really important to move the cash forward so that it matches when we're actually outlaying cash to suppliers. And so we've really had a big focus on that. What can we do to move payment forward and make working capital move, or make working capital equal to when you see the cash outlay? The other thing we've been looking at is contract terms. What does that look like in today's environment? And how do we appropriately share in risk with transit agencies rather than taking it all on as an OEM? We've seen things like requests for 12-year warranties with the transition to zero emission. So please provide a 12-year warranty for my battery and propulsion system. When in the past, an extended warranty on those types of components in an internal combustion engine or a traditional propulsion system would be a 5-year coverage. And so the issue becomes, when you have a 12-year coverage, the OEMs, we're integrators of components. We don't own the intellectual property. We don't always manage all the warranty claims or have the visibility to exactly what's occurring. We don't manufacture the part. And so it becomes really, really important that the warranty term is reflective of what a supplier can offer. Most suppliers won't offer more than a 5 to 6 year warranty. So if a 12-year is requested, you're actually asking the OEM to take that risk on themselves and basically self-insure something that they don't have the same amount of control over as their base manufacturing. So we've also seen the industry do a lot of work on that type of contract term to try to make more of a risk share occur.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Stephanie. At the beginning of this conversation, Sherry is mentioning that the FTA issued a Dear Colleague letter, and they basically encouraged the industry to change some of those terms to make them more acceptable. Has that happened? Are we seeing that actually occur, where people are making progress payments, where they are allowing for price increases or decreases like the APTA task force recommended? Are transit agencies now banding together, so to speak, and not making so many specializations so that you don't have to have 90 different types of windows in your warehouse? Who wants to talk to that one, Jennifer or Steph?
I'll start and then I'll
Okay.
pass back to Jennifer for the engineering portion probably. So definitely the industry has gotten together and had these conversations. So APTA has been working on the white book specification. They've been really focusing on the commercial piece. They've had a working group go through that. We've come up with a set of recommendations that are definitely going through the commenting process right away. And we'll be looking for the final vote, hopefully before the end of the year. And that, of course, was made up of both transit agencies, OEM suppliers, and was a really collaborative conversation to try and just get to a better place than where the white book started and share in some of the risk and adopt these recommendations. When it comes to the transit agencies for progress payments, we are definitely starting to see an adoption of progress payments, moving, let's say, 75% of the bus price up to when you line enter or install an engine, right? Payable net 30 days, making sure you have the adequate security through the bus being, near finished before any payments are moved. Definitely seeing that start to adopt. The advanced payments, where you're seeing sort of a deposit at the time of notice to proceed or purchase order, we're seeing agencies try. It's something new for, not that they've never done it. It's very common in construction or rail car, but for bus, it's new. And so we're seeing a lot of work be done to try and adopt those and also work around, the FTA requires concurrence on an advance payment. How do you go get that concurrence and how do you do it quick enough that we can offer a discount for the time value of money? And so I think there's a learning curve, but that we're seeing the intent be there. For the price changes, we have worked really hard to get through our backlog of buses that were priced at a time that didn't match the inflation to when they were built. We definitely have a couple more that we need to work through, and we're seeing mixed results. We always try to make sure that we provide auditable documentation, that we can really back up the claims that we're making. And in some cases, we are seeing some equitable adjustments. And in other cases, there just might not be the budget or ability to do that. And then in terms of the engineering piece, if it's okay, Jen, I'm going to pass on to you in turn, because you've sat on some of the calls in the industry around best practices for customization.
We definitely hear that customization is definitely a hot topic in the industry right now. And really, there's a lot of curiosity around how much customization plays into the price of a vehicle. So we've been asked that question quite a few times. But interestingly, because there is no such thing as a standardized bus in the North American transit bus world, it's hard to answer that question. But what we have done is we've actually taken the time to think through why custom engineering occurs on the contracts that we have and how we might provide different guidance to agencies on how to make their bus more standardized. When we look at it, we think customizations are driven by a few different things. The first one that actually has a big impact on customization are seating choices and layouts, including ADA provisions. And you wouldn't think that, seats would be a huge customization. And the seat itself might not be, but every change in a seating customization creates a custom structure, custom tapping plates, custom floor heaters, and oddly, all of the electrical harnesses are run through the seats and the stanchions. And so you end up with a lot of cascades related to seating choices and layouts. The second thing that drives a lot of customization are the electronics on the vehicle. And while, agencies are actually typically trying to standardize to their investment for their fleet by making sure that their fleet has the same electronics on board. To a bus manufacturer, it ends up being custom. And so there really is kind of a bit of a balance there that is required. And then the third thing is new major components that the agency wishes to adopt that maybe haven't been used in that vehicle design previously, like doors or HVAC systems or alternate power plant components. And usually those requests are desired to improve an aspect of performance, maintenance, or reliability. And they do require a tremendous amount of work to redesign the vehicles, retest, and then set up the aftermarket supply for. So when we look at all three of those things, there are a few things we can do to kind of create fewer sort of sets of choices, like perhaps setting out, a defined number of seating layouts rather than customizing it for each agency. But, we really don't want to stifle innovation either. So I think there's probably a healthy balance of customization that can occur in there. What we actually are advocating hard for is reducing variation as opposed to customization. So things like having 90 different window sets, or 52 different shades of interior white panels. When you think about that, you end up having like a lot of small batch manufacturing. And right now, when bus manufacturers are struggling with supply disruption and inefficiencies, any place where we can actually limit the amount of inefficiency due to having to, do a small run of 5 purple modesty panel sets or, that sort of thing. Anytime we can reduce that, I think it actually will really go a long way to helping out the bus manufacturers. So while I can't give you a total dollar value because there really isn't a standardized bus, what we can do and have done actually is we've been able to articulate to our customers what areas would be really helpful to kind of reduce the number of choices that we're working from.
Couple more questions before we go. One is, we've touched on it, but I want to dive into it, unpack it a little bit. Because there's such a push now to go to alternate fuels from clean diesel to battery electric or hydrogen or even CNG, are you able to keep up with all of that? And do you have any percentages on where we're at now in the industry, what people are looking for, anything like that?
So maybe I'll start with NFI, and then I can talk a little bit about the industry. So for New Flyer, all of our production lines are capable of both zero emission and internal combustion propulsions. And we do that on purpose because really, more often than not, the universe does not deliver you exactly what you want to build. So you actually need a lot of flexibility in your manufacturing lines to make sure that you can level load all of the different facilities. Right now, we are capable of battery electric in all of our facilities, and we're working to get hydrogen fuel cell electric capable over the next couple of years in all of our facilities as well. So, we were actually a little bit agnostic to what the mix happens to be in any given facility. When we look at where we think our deliveries will be, I think probably by 2025, we are expecting that our proportion will be roughly 40% zero emission across all of the NFI group for zero emission versus internal combustion engine. And we think it'll come to parity in 2027. So we'll start to see that tipping point where we get past 50%. When we look at the actual industry itself, we track what we call a 5-year bid universe. And so basically, whenever a transit agency tells us what they're planning to purchase, and whenever they release a procurement, we record all of that and we take a look at, what that proportion is. And our 5-year forward-looking market, this bid universe, is actually more than 50% zero emissions. So we are seeing that shift in the procurements occur. And, with all of that data, we think it'll go past 50% by 2027, and then it will keep increasing. By 2030, we think the bulk of all of the manufacturing in North America will be zero emission. It'll be a very, very high percentage of it. One of the things that has been really helpful just in terms of, not only the amount of investment that is being put forth through the IIJA and zero emission vehicles, but also some of the mandates around asset planning, zero emission transition plans, that sort of thing with the FTA, is that it is actually incentivizing agencies to be very intentional about their fleet replacement plans. So they are thinking through what their last internal combustion engine procurements might look like, what their infrastructure investment needs to be, and then what their zero emission vehicle purchases need to look like. And because they are being very intentional, they're actually sharing with us some very meaningful information that allows us to plan our supply chain to be a little bit broader and a little bit more resilient going forward. What we have done on the zero emission side of things, and as I mentioned, we do have our predictions of what our production will look like, but because we actually have capability in all of our factories for all different types of propulsion, we're fairly agnostic to that from a manufacturing perspective, but the supply base actually needs to be strengthened, the zero emission supply base. So what we have done is we have actually brought on more zero emission component suppliers across NFI Group to actually help handle that future. And so we're able to get things like dual sourcing of batteries where you get a more resilient supply chain. And we're looking at all the different components that make up our zero emission vehicles and making sure that not only are our initial suppliers healthy, but that we're bringing more suppliers that can supply similar components on. so that we can grow at that rate as well. So I'm actually pretty hopeful. I think that we will all be capable of transitioning as fast as the industry needs us to. I do believe that the pacing item in the zero emission transition is actually going to be the charging infrastructure. That is going to pace the vehicle deliveries at this point.
That makes sense. I was telling you earlier in the green room that I was just talking with Ulois Cleckley down in Miami-Dade about building, really America's biggest garage specifically made for battery electric buses. And it seems like we're a little bit behind on that, that the infrastructure, the charging infrastructure and the facilities need to be ramped up if this is where we're going. Stephanie, any thoughts on?
Well, I mean, the infrastructure is a really interesting piece, right? And I have the opportunity to actually co-lead our infrastructure solutions team at New Flyer and participate in these projects. And we do know that there has been just a record level of funding and that there's been some really great work done in terms of getting chargers out into the industry. But I do agree that it will be the gating factor. And so I think it's really important that we work with agencies. We try to figure out what that timing looks like, what temporary solutions we have, right? Can you take your initial fleet and find ways to temporarily charge or temporarily fuel a hydrogen fuel cell bus while you are working on integrating into your fleet plans? So I think, again, it's all about that creativity and collaboration between all the different stakeholders on how to deliver upon those promises and take down those hurdles one by one.
Let's look into the future. You've kind of looked into it a little bit on one type of thing, but the health of the industry going forward. Now, there's a lot of concern about, it's funny. I was just in Vienna, Austria, and talked to folks there, and they said, we're having very similar issues here. Long waits of vehicles, less manufacturers. And so it doesn't seem like it's restricted just to North America, that we've had some challenges in the industry.
I think in the recent past, so the last 18 months, we've seen a number of bus manufacturers either choose to wind down operations into bankruptcy protection or choose not to be part of the Buy America compliant industry. And that has reduced the capacity of the Buy America compliant bus manufacturing for sure. I think that there is a desire for all bus manufacturers to actually increase their run rates for the existing ones. And that is going to be very much metered by the supply chain. So as the supply chain comes back and actually is able to sustain higher run rates, then the bus manufacturers will increase their capacities as well. Right now, I think we are sitting at approximately 85% of pre-pandemic run rates. We've got plans to increase back to those levels, as do others, and it's really just being metered by supply performance at this point in time. But make no mistake, labor is a very close second in terms of the capacity. We do think that there will be new entrants, and what we think is actually really important is that we've got healthy fundamentals to the industry in terms of contracting terms, risk sharing, all of those things, because really, if you want to have more competition and more bus manufacturing in the space, you've got to have some basic economic healthy fundamentals in there as well. So we do think it'll come. It's not coming fast enough for any of us. We'd all love it to recover faster, but we do think we'll get there.
Stephanie, any final words from you?
Yeah, definitely. I would say overall, we're very hopeful. We see all the industry stakeholders coming together and working on solutions. And so, we start somewhere and we say, hey, this is a problem and we think this might work. And it just develops. And we're seeing people come to the table with really creative ways to get things done. And I think we're at this point where we're truly modernizing how we procure, what we buy, how we look at this industry. And we're saying, okay, 20 years ago, we bought $300,000 diesel buses. Today, we're pursuing zero emission transition, infrastructure that goes with it, some of the really interesting technology out there around telematics and monitoring. And we're really thinking about, as an industry, how do we learn from these moments and how do we modernize what we're doing so that we can actually make our way into the future slightly differently, considering the health of all the parties involved. And I just think it's a really wonderful opportunity that we all get to learn together and work on this together. And I'm nothing but amazed by the contributions of all the different stakeholders in the industry as we work our way through these problems.
Thank you, Jennifer, Stephanie, and Sherry, for sharing with us the health of the industry, where we've been at over the last 18 months, and where it looks like we're going in the future. We wish you the very best for not only your company, but for our industry and the OEM industry as a whole in our transit industry. Sherry, thank you for helping me put this panel together today.
Happy to do it.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Transit Unplugged. Hi, I'm Tris Hussey, editor of the podcast, and I'd like to thank our guests, Sherry Little, Jennifer McNeill, and Stephanie Laubenstein, for their time and insights on this really essential and important issue affecting all of us. Now, coming up next week on the show, we head back across the pond to London. We hear how Transport for London's Philip Gerhardt and the Bus Operations Directorate works with their 8 operator partners to optimize the over 650 bus routes and 19,000 bus stops across London. Transit Unplugged is brought to you by Modaxo. At Modaxo, we're passionate about moving the world's people, and at Transit Unplugged, we're passionate about telling those stories. So until next week, ride safe and ride happy.